Renewable natural gas, or green gas, is significantly cheaper than renewable electricity. Better yet, it offers the same environmental benefits as green power and provides economic benefits through local job creation. But how does it work? Everyone knows their garbage is picked up by waste trucks and taken to landfills. But what happens once it gets there? The organic matter is broken down to produce a mixture of different gases called biogas. It's collected and cleaned to produce biomethane. It's then used to refuel trucks and provide energy to your home, and restarting the green gas life cycle. From replacing traditional natural gas for home heating to fueling city buses and more, green gas is just one way that Enbridge is reducing Ontario's carbon footprint and greening the natural gas grid. For more information, visit enbridgegas.com/greengas.
Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Parvati Pillai. I work as a project manager for zero emission bus simulation and commercialization at CUTRIC. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this special session on getting to zero with renewable natural gas and CNG buses for transit fleet. We are building on our grand success from our second low carbon smart mobility technology innovation conference that we hosted back in June of this year. And I'm really thankful to Enbridge for supporting us as a sponsor in this particular session. So before I introduce my panelists to take you through what RNG and CNG means for Canadian transit, I would start by giving a brief overview on why this is an important topic that we need to consider. When we talk about zero emission buses and zero emission bus deployments, usually the idea is surrounding battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. But in our electrification agenda, sometimes CNG and RNG, more importantly, gets forgotten. We are trying to find out what the reasons for that are and what the opportunities for utilizing RNG, CNG in Canada are. We are going to hear right from the experts. I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Joey Seipels, Business Development Manager at Enbridge, to this panel. Welcome, Joey. I do have the pleasure of having Mr. Russell Davies, Acting Director at Calgary Transit, joining me. Welcome, Russell. And I do also have Mr. Bruce Winchester, Executive Director, Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance, joining me here today as well. Welcome to all panelists. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you all once again to learn more about the CNG, RNG landscape that we have in Canada, what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and what may be the reason why more and more transit agencies may want to consider CNG, RNG going forward. Before we begin the panel discussion, which I'm sure the audience are looking forward to, let me begin by inviting our panelists to give a brief overview of their prowess in the industry and why they consider CNG, RNG to be important. Let me start with you, Joey. Could I ask you to deliver a short presentation, and then we would move to the next person.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, my name is Joey Seipels. I'm a specialist with Enbridge Gas based out of Chatham, Ontario. Switch slides here. So who's Enbridge Gas? About 2 years ago, Enbridge Gas Distribution and Union Gas merged together as one gas utility in Ontario. So with the two utilities joining, we have over 170 years of experience delivering safe and reliable energy in Ontario. We have about 3.7 million customers, providing heat to over 75% of Ontario's homes. The Dawn Storage Hub, which is located in between Sarnia and Chatham at the bottom of the map there, is one of the top natural gas trading storage facilities in North America. And our demand side management programs have saved almost 19 billion cubic meters of natural gas. So with compressed natural gas stations, we've been doing this for quite a long time. We help with the design, build, operation, and maintenance of CNG stations, about 30 years of experience. Some of the most recent stations that we've been involved with is 3 with the City of Toronto, one Bermondsey, Ellesmere, and Ingram. Hamilton Street Railway with their transit buses, About 2 years ago, we built 3 CNG stations along the Highway 401 across Ontario, one in Napanee, London, and Windsor. And these are public accessible, heavy-duty CNG stations. Park and Fly in Toronto, and then we're involved in smaller VRA-type refuelers in arenas and forklift stations across the province. I'm not going to talk too much about what natural gas in transit is, but I'd like to share a little bit about a municipal natural gas program that we put together. So we're now offering Ontario communities an all-inclusive turnkey solution to switch from diesel to natural gas buses. So what that means, we provide an end-to-end solution up into including covering all incremental capital. The graph on the right shows an example. This is scalable, and it's not even just for transit buses. It could be for public works vehicles if there's an interest, but we'd cover the incremental cost of the vehicles, the design and construction of the CNG station, any maintenance facility upgrades, and training and change management. So we're able to do this with a long-term fuel agreement. And what we're happy to share is there's substantial fuel savings that I think Russell will touch on in his presentation. But what you can do is take these fuel savings and start procuring renewable natural gas. You could get up to almost a 30% blend and spend the same as you are on diesel today. So we see this as a market-ready and a cost-effective path to bring your transit to zero-emission fleet. What is renewable natural gas? It's carbon-neutral energy that's created from decomposing organic waste. So as long as there's humans on the earth producing waste, we're going to be producing methane. And what you can do is grab that methane from wastewater treatment plants, landfills, farms, and clean it so it's pipeline quality and injected into a natural gas distribution system. RNG, or renewable natural gas, is fully interchangeable with conventional natural gas. So your furnace or your bus or barbecue doesn't know if it's burning renewable natural gas or conventional natural gas. Exhaust emissions are 90% lower than current EPA. And then for greenhouse gas reductions, when you look at a carbon life cycle standpoint, it says 80% or higher, but like manure RNG gets into negative 200%. So you can not even just get to carbon neutral, you can become carbon negative by burning renewable natural gas in your vehicles or your homes. The picture on the right is shows what a closed loop situation could look like. So this is what the City of Toronto is doing. So the solid organic wastes are collected by the refuse vehicles. They're transported to an anaerobic digester where the materials are broken down and biomethane is produced. It's cleaned up, injected into Enbridge Gas's distribution system, which can be used to heat homes, generate electricity, or fuel the City of Toronto's vehicles. For a U.S. standpoint, last year, almost 40% of all natural gas burned in natural gas vehicles was renewable natural gas. There's not a lot of RNG currently available across Canada, but there's a lot of projects being built and commissioned as we speak. So along that, in Ontario, in 5 years, we're expecting to see around 200 million diesel liter equivalents of RNG produced. This graph kind of highlights where some of these projects are happening across southern Ontario. But on a Canada-wide scale, the CGA, or Canadian Gas Association, expects approximately 85,000 billion cubic feet of RNG produced per year. That's in the magnitude of 2 to 3 billion diesel liter equivalents. So there's a lot of biomethane available in the country, and the projects are now starting to be built, and RNG will be available everywhere. Some challenges for natural gas at transit. As as everyone probably knows, conventional natural gas has higher emissions footprint compared to electric. However, this is now mitigated with the RNG opportunities that are available. So depending on how much RNG you blend into your vehicles and what the source is, you can actually have a lower emissions profile than electric. We find that the market has bad memories of the early technology from the early 90s. However, these vehicles have been around for 30 plus years. In the United States, 1 in every 3 buses procured is a natural gas bus. I think across North America, there's just shy of 15,000 CNG or natural gas vehicles. And then the last point was the adoption speed of renewable natural gas projects. Canada kind of lagged the United States in these. However, we're catching up very quickly. So that's very quickly what my presentation is, and I look forward to the Q&A afterwards.
Thank you so much, Joey. That was a very interesting presentation, and I'm really excited about the fact that we have a huge RNG potential in Ontario itself. And I thank you for concluding with a nice segue for me to invite our next speaker, Russell, because this is about the challenges of natural gas for transit. So let's hear right from Russell about what Calgary Transit is doing on the RNG CNG front. Over to you, Russell. Thank you, Joey.
Thanks, Wolfie. I appreciate it. So Russell Davis, Acting Director of Calgary Transit here, and I thought I'd just give a quick overview about what Calgary Transit service typically is in a non-COVID world, and how we got where we are with CNG and what we're looking to do with it going forward. This slide here just provides a brief overview of what Calgary Transit was like pre-COVID. You know, we were fairly successful in terms of 600,000 trips a day on bus and rail, and a fairly sizable fleet of over 1,000 vehicles when we looked at buses and trains combined. On our bus fleet, the vast majority, the same as most people, fairly early on in the 2000s, our vast majority of our fleet was diesel, and so probably up until the mid-teens, 2020 teens, we were consuming around about 28 million litres of fuel a year, which is fairly significant, and we were the single largest GHG producer within the city of Calgary, kind of thing. So it's a fairly substantial portion of the overall GHG emissions for the city. The problem is diesel, of course, is a very intense fuel source. It's very difficult to move away from in terms of the economy of it. But as where we were in the early 2000s was that the fuel price for diesel was at a high degree of variability, and you know, we were seeing like 1 cent a litre change in the price would basically work out to about, give or take a bit, about $250,000 a year, kind of thing. So prices at the time were varying by 10, 15 cents a day sometimes. So it became an unmanageable situation in terms of trying to manage the budgets. So we needed to find some greater stability. And it was around about that time then that we started looking at CNG, because we'd had some brief discussions and some taking part in some presentations with some of the oil and gas companies here in town, and they sort of put out some interesting premises for long-term natural gas contracts. So as you can see on that slide there, in about 2012, we started looking at CNG as an alternate to diesel, and we looked at a number of the agencies around North America, primarily in cold climates, just because that was obviously what we were interested in. And that just kind of whet our appetite, really. They were all seeing sort of fairly favourable numbers, to be honest, in terms of emissions, in terms of costs, and in terms of operating ability. So it was looking kind of promising, and it prompted us to start a trial. And you can see there on the left of those two pictures, that's one of the buses that we had as a trial for CNG. We ran that trial for it was about 18 months or so in total, I think. And we sent a final report to council and said, hey, I think there's something to look at here. We said, you know, there's a good return in terms of savings from the fuel. There was no real downside in terms of the maintenance piece, and we thought environmentally, we thought there was enough there to sell it. Coincidentally, around about the same time, we were looking to build a new maintenance facility, and so we made the case successfully to make it a CNG compliant facility. And that's the picture you can see there in the top right. that's actually not a rendering even. That's actually, that really is the shop. So it just looks a little pristine there. But in 2019, we opened our Stoney Transit facility, and that's 450 buses capacity. We have 38 maintenance bays, and the largest indoor CNG fueling facility, we believe, in North America and possibly the world. So we can fuel 6 CNG buses from pretty much empty to full, 6 buses simultaneously in around about 4 to 5 minutes. So one of the key attributes about natural gas when we built this facility was that we needed to make this look and feel, in some respects, as much like our regular fleet for the operators and for the maintenance personnel and for the servicing personnel as possible. So we needed to have that quick fill time. So we did pay a little bit of a premium to get that fast fuel time, but we worked very closely with our gas supplier. We got high pressure gas lines in, and we've been fairly successful, I think, in terms of sustaining that as an overall product as part of our portfolio. Those 2 drawings on the bottom of the screen are renderings; they're not real ones. But you can see the facility there. It's about 500,000 square feet, so we've been running it since March last year, and it's been very successful for us, actually. Part of the sales pitch for this facility was about the ability of this facility to transition to RNG when it's needed. And the appeal of RNG for us obviously was not so much cost driven, that was just purely environmentally driven in terms of greenhouse gas footprints. We do understand that there's a cost premium associated with RNG, but that's something that we're willing to pay. Our only problem is just sourcing the fuel. That's all RNG boils down to for us. We have no worries about trying RNG. We even understand that RNG isn't necessarily the product. It's not necessarily the product that comes out of the pipe. It's just you pay for RNG to be generated within your province, and it goes into the line somewhere, and you just pay the premium basically to allow for that fuel to be generated, which is very similar to what we do for our electricity, which we used to run our trains. We pay for wind power, even though that's, we're not physically connected to the windmills, kind of thing. So with what we've seen so far with CNG is drastically reduced fuel costs, and this was part of our overall business case. So we committed to council to saving $5,000 a year on fuel with CNG compared to diesel. We were hoping for 10, but we're seeing closer to 20. So the savings we're seeing from the fuel costs have been quite incredible. Really, it really is quite incredible. The fuel is it's not quite free, but it's almost. The compression costs are probably as significant, if not marginally more significant, than the cost of the fuel. So the whole thing works out very, very well as far as a pure financial business case. In terms of maintenance costs, we haven't seen a drastic difference. It's been a little bit less, but not huge. The biggest piece and the most favorable piece for us, obviously, is you don't need to do any of the maintenance associated within the after treatment systems. The DPF and the constant cleaning and clogging and in-service issues that you have with those, that issue goes away. We thought that would be offset with issues associated with spark ignition and engines, but really that hasn't materialized. So our costs have actually come down fairly significantly, which is reasonably significant, which is an added bonus, really. In terms of the service, that's probably been one of the good things. We didn't need to do a ton of training with our operators. We told them they're driving CNG, but really they're driving them as they were driving a diesel bus. We're getting roughly the same range. You see about a 10% reduction, give or take a bit. But we're seeing roughly the same range, roughly the same performance, and really the operators, for the most part, couldn't tell the difference if they're driving a diesel or a natural gas bus, other than the fact that the buses are quieter when they're sitting and idling. Emissions, we were already fairly good, I guess, in terms of particulate emissions, and they're obviously very good with CNG as well, which is why we wanted to transition to the next step, which is basically reducing the GHG portion of it, which is where RNG comes into it. So in terms of the challenges we had, infrastructure costs for the building, obviously significant, but we were fortunate, I guess, in that time was on our side that the new facility was being built, and it was just a small incremental cost. I mean, I don't actually have the detailed numbers about what the increment was, but it's probably in that realm of about 10 million for the facility of that size is what it cost us as a premium. But when you're saving $20,000 a year per bus, you make up that delta fairly quick, actually. So the business case is very, very easy to make, actually. The next bullet there, we've got a transition to RNG. I've said that it's too costly to implement, but I think really that if there was sufficient source within the province, we would pay that premium. So we pay that premium on electricity now, and we're okay with that. We understand there's a certain commitment that's needed from a municipal organization, that you have to take some leadership in terms of some of these emissions. And so I think an RNG product would go an awful long way towards that, actually, and it would be a fantastic story. We just need the fuel to be available, that's all. And the last bullet there is just basically the same as most operating companies are seeing. COVID has obviously impacted us drastically here, and it has impacted our implementation plan. We were hoping to be at about 400 buses CNG by the end of next year, but we've had to put that on a bit of a hold right now just because of service levels and capital commitments as well. So the broad story is, I think CNG, we thought it might be a good business case. It's turned out to be a very good business case indeed, and I think we're just looking for some help to get to that next step of an RNG-based model to actually benefit the environment a little more again. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll leave the rest of the questions for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Russell. It's always great to hear right from the end user, a customer who is using CNG, and I realize the size of the fleet at Calgary. So it's really good that you are sharing your insights here, and I'm sure our audience, particularly the transit agency members, really appreciate your insights here, because you are presenting what constitutes an empirical evidence for CNG business casing. Thank you so much. Audience, please do continue to raise your questions in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and we would be glad to answer them for you. Thank you so much, Russell. And I now have the privilege of inviting Bruce Winchester from the Canadian Natural Gas Worker Alliance to deliver his presentation. Over to you, Bruce.
All right, and there's my presentation. Well, thank you to our friends at CUTRIC for organizing this event. This is a great opportunity to talk about RNG and CNG as a way to reduce emissions, and where we're going with this. So we're the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance. We're obviously a national industry organization, and so we're happy to be here and to talk about what some of our members are up to. So we're, as I said, a member-supported organization, and we have a full value chain in our membership. So what do I mean? We have fuel producers, fuel vendors, equipment service providers, engine vehicle manufacturers, and of course fleet users like the city of Calgary. We don't have them as a member yet, but we might someday. We do have some other fleets. We've got 3 decades of industry support and advocacy, so we've been around for quite some time. We have a mandate to promote sustainable use of gaseous fuels in Canada and Canadian transportation, and that's on-road vehicles like transit buses, off-road vehicles, and marine vessels like the BC ferries, vessels that operate on LNG. We have, as an industry, focused in on medium and heavy duty vehicles. So transit vehicles are kind of right there in the sweet spot, but we're also, as I alluded to, looking at marine vessels and a whole host of other vehicles where the opportunities to reduce emissions are, a little more difficult to find. CNG and LNG, which is very similar, offer ways to do that. We have a long history in transit. Some of the earliest innovation projects and deployments actually occurred in transit vehicles with transit fleets going back to the 1980s and into the 1990s, as Joey alluded to in his presentation. There were certainly some evolving technologies, and in the case of the current engines, the Cummins Westport engines, this is the 4th version, so it's changed over time of that product, and certainly benefited from all of those deployments, and there are about 80,000 of those units in operation around North America, so that's pretty good. Today we have about 500 natural gas transit vehicles, and we are looking to have about 1,000 by 2025, and that's just based on the commitments of fleets like Calgary Transit, BC Transit, and Hamilton Street Rail, for example, so the larger ones. In 2019, we inaugurated our first NGV Achievement Awards, and as it happens, 3 of the winners in that year were transit agencies, and they included BC Transit, Calgary Transit for that lovely facility that Russell showed in his presentation, and it is quite a spectacular facility, I do say. BC Transit, of course, has been very active in deploying CNG buses. About a week ago, they announced another couple dozen buses being deployed in their area in British Columbia. And then finally, the Hamilton Street Rail, which is actually one of those transit fleets that goes all the way back to the early 1980s and was an early innovator and early adopter of CNG. So we're quite proud to have them still so committed to using CNG in their transit fleet. So transit in Canada, there are about 100 transit agencies. They operate 17,000 buses, and they serve about 27 million Canadians, COVID-19 or not. They generate, as it happens, about 1.2 megatons or 1.3 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions each year. So there's a bit of a hill to climb in terms of reducing those emissions. When it comes to natural gas in transit, already we've reduced about 13,000 tons of GHG emissions each year, and that's just based on the fleets that are already deployed. Renewable natural gas in transit kind of takes it up a whole other level. And so right now what we're seeing is a request for proposal and contracting phases for some transit agencies. So they're out looking, trying to find RNG, and in some cases have actually contracted. If you look at the facts and figures coming out of a little organization called RNG INET, which is a group that's been set up by the industry to kind of talk about and exchange information. There are 18 RNG projects in Canada right now, and they have an estimated production of about 6.4 million gigajoules. To put that in transit vehicle terms, that's not enough for 17,000 buses, but if we saw 2,500, so considerably more than we're expecting, but 2,500 transit buses would require about 3.9 million gigajoules of that. So we have lots of RNG there, and it works out to about 100 million liters of RNG that those buses would use. And there's lots of production potential to supply those fleets. So natural gas in transit is starting to deliver cost savings and emissions reductions. We've already seen that. Russell talked a little bit about that in his presentation, and I have also included a similar picture of this facility, not a rendering. And you can see down below, we've got the little discussion of the closed loop on the slide here to talk about how RNG works, and I think we saw in the video how that works. It's a really great and exciting opportunity for municipalities because they're also a pretty big source of those organic sources of waste, so solid waste, municipal solid waste, etc. And quite recently, the City of Toronto has rolled out sort of next phase in its RNG deployment. They have used RNG, or starting to use RNG in their refuse fleet, which is what's depicted in that little closed loop, very similar to transit buses. And so most recently, the City of Toronto has resolved, as part of their response to the climate change emergency that was declared by their city council a few months back, to actually use the RNG that they have produced to produce more RNG and to find more places, including across a variety of fleets, not just the refuse fleets, where they can use that RNG to, again, affect some significant emissions reductions. And for our own part, here at CNGVA, we have continued on with our outreach efforts, and we have entered into an agreement to create a course aimed at members of the Canadian Urban Transit Association. And so it's a gaseous fuels for transit course, and it deals with three different types of gaseous fuels, CNG and RNG, of course, which we're talking about here, but also it covers some elements of hydrogen, which a lot of folks are becoming quite interested in as another gaseous fuel that can be used in transit applications. So that course is in the process of development, and we are crossing our fingers and hoping that will be available for CUTA members starting in the fall. So that's going to be a great opportunity and a great vehicle for people in the public transit community to learn about how to do what Calgary Transit has done. And so we're quite pleased that will be available to the community quite soon. In terms of the future of transit, and I thought, this CUTRIC's all about innovation, and innovation is an important thing for all of us here in Canada. I thought that maybe we'd turn the aperture a little bit away from kind of what we're doing nationally and kind of think about what we can do as time goes by. Now, the current COVID-19 response and its implications, are they altering the future of mobility? Well, certainly we're seeing a lot of changes in our society, and we're also seeing a lot of return to the old normal as part of the new normal. So, from our perspective, transit vehicles are a subset of this medium and heavy duty transportation sector. And, we believe for these various types of vehicles, which again, transit vehicles are kind of right in the sweet spot, right in the middle. There's several gaseous fuel pathways. So first of all, we've got next generation natural gas engines, which will really boost efficiency and again, increase those emissions reductions. So we're in the realm of sort of 15 to 20% life cycle reductions over conventional diesel. And we're looking to see, a 15 or 20% increase in those efficiencies in the future. So again, you can sort of see the emissions will increase and emissions reductions will increase, and our performance gets better. We want to see substantial expansion of RNG feedstocks and technologies to meet zero emissions and environmental impacts. What do I mean? I mean getting into some of the woody biomass, which is already sort of captured as a carbon sink. And so those have really significant emissions reduction potential, but also looking at other, maybe not greenhouse gas producing sources of waste like plastics, where it's certainly a significant environmental challenge. And we would like to see more of these feedstocks kind of coming online and being used and returning from the natural gas, which is a feedstock in plastics, back to being able to use that natural gas after it's been used as a plastic to fuel things like transit vehicles. Natural gas and electric vehicle hybrids. And I've written here series and parallel applications. What does that mean? Well, one is a natural gas vehicle that operates entirely as an electric powertrain, and another is one that has a natural gas powertrain as well as an electric working together. And so the latest development here is a company called Helion, which has actually got the first electrified Class 8 truck in Canada, is a Helion CNG electric natural gas hybrid, and it's being operated in Ontario. And there's a company that's been testing out to see how it works to carry some very, very heavy loads. And the early days and the early feedback is that it's fantastic, and it's going to be a great thing to see. And there's lots of other projects that are looking at using natural gas and electricity together. Hydrogen blending, which will allow you to harness power to gas production and sort of incrementally reduce the emissions intensity of natural gas. So there's some early looking at how to do that, and some of the gas utilities are starting to kind of start that process. And then finally, hydrogen use in vehicles. Will they be fuel cells? Will they be direct combustion? There's a lot of choices, and more gaseous fuel options are going to be available for medium and heavy duty transportation. And we're excited because most of our members really are going to be engaged in all of that. And then finally, one of our big innovation pieces in the natural gas industry is something called the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. And this supports next generation technologies and projects, which include a whole bunch of next generation RNG feedstocks, which include a whole bunch of vehicle and other projects. And this is a great investment that the industry has made, and we're quite proud of that. And so we know there's a great future for a whole bunch of different natural gas applications. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for that great presentation. I'm particularly thankful to you for painting a very bright picture of the future for us all in this post-COVID or trans-COVID phase, where the world is divided between pre-COVID and post-COVID. Thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing your insights and for raising very valuable points about why CNG is important, why RNG is important, and what can Canada and the world benefit from. So I'm hearing a lot of questions from our audience already, but before we dive deep into the applications and the challenges and the opportunities, I do want to start off with a very basic question to actually set the framework. And maybe I would pose this question to you, Joy, because you are coming from the utility standpoint. Our audience members are wondering if you could draw the distinction between what is the difference between CNG, LNG, and RNG in terms of their emissions profile, and what kind of constitution is there for those three applications of natural gas, and how are they different?
Yeah, no, it's actually a great question. So LNG and CNG are the same molecule. It's just what you do with that molecule. So CNG, you compress the gas very high pressure up to around 3,600 psi, and that's how that energy is stored. where LNG, or liquefied natural gas, is the natural gas is cooled to, I think it's around 160 degrees Celsius. And what that does is it increases the amount of energy density, that you can store a lot of energy in a smaller space and be able to transport that energy at atmospheric pressure. So same pressure as the atmosphere versus 3,600 psi in a CNG tank. RNG, or renewable natural gas, is biomethane. So rather than conventional natural gas from the ground, renewable natural gas is when there's decaying organic material, methane is created, and that can be cleaned up and injected into the system. So at the end of the day, very similar molecules. It's just where they come from and how they're stored.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Joy, for that explanation. I'm sure our audience would be clear on what the distinctions are. So that brings me to another point about the reputation of CNG. And I have a different screen here, so that's why I'm looking here. So CNG kind of faces a very challenging reputation in terms of not being the the zero emission fuel in a well-to-wheel perspective because of the hydraulic fracking involved. So Joy, I understand you already touched upon why RNG is different. So why do people call RNG to be carbon neutral if they are essentially the same molecule, but they are coming from natural source, or it's basically biomethane? How is it going to be carbon neutral? Is it still going to give out carbon dioxide when you're burning it like natural gas does? So how is RNG carbon neutral?
Yeah, so also another great question. So when you burn it, there is carbon dioxide that's released. However, RNG is carbon abatement. So as I said earlier in my presentation, as long as there's humans walking the earth, we're going to produce waste and we're going to produce methane. That methane today is either vented into the atmosphere or it's burnt, at a landfill. But what you can do is take that methane, inject it into a distribution system, and burn it through a vehicle. So it doesn't contribute to any net carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now you'll hear a term biogenic carbon dioxide. However, when you look at the entire natural carbon cycle, there's no additional CO2 going to the atmosphere that wouldn't have already went there.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much.
That clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, it does. It does definitely. Thank you so much. So now I do want to turn to Russell for a transit perspective. And this is basically coming from, our Californian experiences as well. So we all agree California is a hub of zero emission buses, and a lot of transit agencies which have been operating CNG buses are now told to go the electric route of using zero emission buses involving battery or hydrogen. And I listened to your presentation, so I noticed that you started investigating and exploring CNG like almost 8 years ago and have very demonstrated track record in successful operations from CNG, and you as a transit operator are very happy as well. How would you, respond to this call for electrification that is happening all across the North American world, from a transit perspective?
Yeah, that's the question we get a lot, actually, and obviously that was one of the bigger barriers we had to selling the CNG story, to be perfectly honest. But really, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Just because you do one, it doesn't mean you can't do the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing that we've learned from examining the electric bus models that we've seen throughout North America and throughout the world is that there's not one solution for everything. Electric buses will almost certainly have their place within our organization, but they won't be a wide-scale replacement for us. I think right now, when we look at the infrastructure associated with charging for electric buses, that causes us some concern. The electric bus still hasn't really landed on a solid model, but whether it's en route charging or in base charging, they both have their positives and negatives. Yep. No pun intended. I think we will go there. But I think that was what we're looking to do, and I briefly touched on it when I talked about the the wild variation in prices associated with fuel, we need to diversify in our fuel models. That's all. So we've already started looking at some gasoline. We have some gasoline smaller vehicles. We have some CNG big vehicles. We still have some CNG, some diesel big vehicles, but we'll probably have some electric vehicles as well. We intend to have a full portfolio of everything, to be honest, until the electric vehicle model stabilizes and or CNG and RNG becomes more available or hydrogen becomes more available. We're going to keep that diversification of fuel, I think, is the key piece. But for us, I say the electric bus it's not a stable model just yet. It will be, but we don't know whether it's going to be en route charging in base charging. In base charging works well for a smaller scale facility. So if you've got 10 buses, 15 buses, 20 buses, that's fine. That's easy kind of thing. But if you're trying to charge 450 buses at one time and they've all got roughly 700 kilowatts of batteries on them, that's an enormous substation associated with the facility. And I think our rough calculations were for a 250 bus facility, you need a substation as big as something to cope with a small town, 10,000 home kind of town. So those kind of numbers were just kind of shocking for us, really. So it will have its place, and it'll have its place fairly soon as well on the right scale. But, one doesn't necessarily exclude the other. I think that's the key piece.
I think that's a great response, Russell, and I'm really thankful that you mentioned the diversification and the complementarity of the solutions, because at CUTRIC, when we do the zero emission bus simulations, this is something that we get as well. Sometimes clients may think they only need in-depot charging, when in reality, only after modeling, you realize, okay, in-depot charging combined with en-route charging, combined with hydrogen is required to electrify successfully most of their fleet. And still there might be a portion which may require additional solutions such as RNG to make it a complementary, a complete electrification. So I'm super glad that you brought out that point from a transit agency perspective. And could I turn to you, Bruce, from a Canada-wide standpoint, when you look at the zero emission lens from a CNG, RNG perspective at the Canadian transit systems, you already mentioned about the number of buses and the footprint of GHG emissions emanating from them. What do you see as the future for RNG? As Joey was mentioning, CNG is a solution, but we could increasingly utilize the potential, the resource potential for RNG emerging in the country and inject it and blend it to achieve zero emissions. So what is the future of electrification from that lens on a Canada-wide scale, in your opinion, Bruce?
Well, I try not to comment on the future of electrification, but let's talking nationally. There are a lot of different vehicles. There are a lot of different types of modalities and demands across the country. So, we make sure that policymakers understand that the objective is the most important thing, not the choice in technology. What do I mean? What I mean is allow for a variety of different solutions to get to where you need to go to. And if what you're trying to do is eliminate emissions, don't get hung up on, if this thing works perfectly, it'll eliminate all the emissions. Think about what you can do immediately, what you can deploy in short order. And that's where natural gas and in the natural gas vehicles as they currently stand are already delivering those emissions reductions. And, so Russell's fleet is one of the few fleets out there that's actually reduced its emissions through use of natural gas. And that's great. On a go-forward basis, we see a lot of potential. We see a lot of potential with things like RNG. There's certainly going to be a lot of magic blends that gas companies are going to be putting together as the Clean Fuel Standard, which is a federal regulation that's being considered right now. As the Clean Fuel Standard comes into place, I think it's going to be very interesting, and that's why we talk about different pathways for using hydrogen, for instance. But RNG projects take time to get up to speed. They are largely municipally based projects. The gas utilities operate in a provincial milieu. There are policy environments that need to change, and they're changing very quickly. But they also need a lot more investment. And what concerns me is when we sort of pit one technology against another. The California example, as you alluded to, just go this way. Well, that those aren't zero emission buses in California. First of all, they have an emissions grid that emits more than the national electricity grid in Canada. Not as much as the electricity grid emits in Alberta, but definitely more than most other provinces in Canada. And so that's not necessarily getting you to zero. And so we have an opportunity in Canada to really get further ahead by being sensible in how we do it. And to a certain extent, we are seeing policies that are fairly open and are fairly neutral, but we need to make sure that organizations like ours, organizations like CUTRIC, are able to create a platform, as you've done here, of course, where we can talk about all of the solutions, and so that transit agencies can get the tools that they need. And that's why we've created the course, and that's why we continue to do outreach, and that's why, again, this is where CUTRIC and CNGVA work together. And so I think there's a lot we can do. We really can drive significant emissions reductions. And if we do it right, it won't cost so much money that the poor transit agencies are in even more trouble than they might be as a result of COVID. And that will pass. I mean, 2 or 3 years from now, I think we'll all be back to the kinds of volumes, maybe sooner really, that transit agencies are accustomed to, and that will allow them to spend the money that they are going to be a little reluctant to spend this year or next year. And so hopefully, and what we've most recently done, we've actually put a letter in, and now we put a pre-budget submission into the federal government. We're saying, look, now is the time to invest in RNG projects. Now is the time to invest in CNG projects and other low emission projects, of course, because this is something we can do to really move things forward. And, Enbridge has got a program. They came out with that before COVID-19. They've got a program that they're working pretty hard on. And we'd like to see, the provincial government in Ontario, the federal government, that kind of come together and get their infrastructure agreement, their transit agreement working, so that they can have even more money, and so that transit agencies can make, in Ontario in particular, can access that. And if you think about it, I talked about 100 agencies, transit agencies in Canada. Well, there are at least 30 or 40 of them in the province of Ontario. So that is where a lot of action has to happen. Now we don't like to talk about, the old, how do we change the light bulb in Toronto, put our hand up into the light bulb and let the world revolve around us. We don't like to present Ontario on those terms. But that's a big prize. That's a big opportunity. And so we're really pushing there, and we're working with all of our partners to make that happen.
That's great to hear. I mean, you touched upon the policy level, like advocacy work that you're already doing. So that is great to hear. So because you mentioned Ontario, I do want to come back to our Ontario's situation, and want to pose this question to you, Joey. A little bit of a segue. When we consider RNG production, I know you touched upon the fact how biomethane is available and how we can use it from a municipal or a city or town planning perspective. Do cities need to actually investigate how they can change their garbage collection system to improve the capacity or the quality of RNG for vehicular use? So, and a side question or a sub question to that is, how different is the RNG quality that you inject into a natural gas pipeline versus what you use in a vehicle system? Or is there a difference? So can I pose that question to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have meetings all across Ontario, along with my peers, and almost all the municipalities are looking at RNG projects. We hear 2024, there's going to be a mandatory green bin program, and the question is going to be, what do you do with these organics? So everyone's looking at it. Actually, the bigger question isn't if they're going to do an RNG project, it's going to be, what do they do with the RNG? Do they sell it out of the province as a revenue sharing mechanism, or do they use the RNG to lower emissions within the province? So across Ontario, it's everyone's interested in it. Not everyone's going to have a project, but they'll be fighting amongst municipalities on trying to poach each other's biomaterial. Now, what was the second part of your question?
The quality of RNG.
Yeah, so the quality is the exact same. Our pipeline, our Enbridge's equipment, residential equipment, wouldn't notice a difference on whether it was biomethane or conventional natural gas. We have an application currently sitting with the Ontario Energy Board. So it's a voluntary RNG program where residents will be able to choose to pay a small incremental amount on their monthly natural gas bill to have natural gas blending. So we hope that it goes through the OEB, but homes across Ontario will be burning renewable natural gas very soon.
Mm-hmm. Great. That is great to hear. Thank you for answering that question, Joey. Right now, I do want to pose a question to you, Russell, because some of our transit agency colleagues online are wondering, and I know you did touch upon the maintenance cost aspect. So because you have the experience of operating this many CNG buses for long, how would you say the operational cost savings from CNG compared to that of diesel buses? How is CNG proving to be a very solid economic business case for a transit agency like Calgary?
Yeah, so for us, CNG wasn't an environmental discussion for us at the start. To be perfectly honest, it was purely financial, and the financial side was almost all predicated on the cost of fuel, and that's basically all it boiled down to at the time. And we've seen the savings from fuel, as I mentioned, have been more than probably we would have really expected. And when we combine it with the actual maintenance costs, we are seeing close to $20,000 a year per bus saving. But that's only after 1 year of operation. Obviously, one of the key decisions we made here as well, I think, was we were buying the right tool for the right job. We didn't try to convert an old diesel bus into a CNG bus. We didn't do that. We bought a CNG bus. So we bought the right thing at the start to do the right job. And I think that was probably a key piece as well. Everything was aligned in the right way, whether it's transmission settings, engine settings, fuel management, everything, And I think that's been probably one of the key things we've learned actually, is if you're going to do it properly. Don't go half-heartedly into it and try to convert some old bus to a CNG one and then expect the same performance. You're taking a risk there. I don't know if that's going to happen, but we actually have seen, all the savings are more than we were hoping to see. I say that the maintenance ones are a little difficult to tell right now because obviously the buses are new. There's warranty claims in against some of them, as opposed to regular maintenance ones. But in terms of the actual scheduled maintenance activities, it's been pretty much close to a wash. So there's been no extra cost associated with running the CNGs at all. We didn't even need to do a lot of training for our mechanics even, and certainly not for the operators. For the mechanics, really, we had a few of them that were trained to do inspections on pressurized vessels for the fuel tanks. But really, we're relying on experts when we need to. So we don't maintain our own compressor station, for argument's sake. That's contracted out. So if we want full certification on our fuel tanks, we'll be taking that to somebody else that really knows that work. We concentrate on the work we know. So say that whole package together, you need to look at it a little bit holistically almost. You can't just look at it in isolation. And I think if you do that, you will see those savings. I'm very confident of it actually, and I think we had some discussions some time ago with other agencies within Alberta. Medicine Hat and Red Deer have also taken on a CNG fleet as well, and they're seeing numbers that are almost exactly the same as ours. So if you plan it at the start, if you buy the right equipment, and don't try to do it on the cheap kind of thing, then you will see those savings, and you will get that payback. We didn't see a huge increase in the cost of the bus price for a CNG bus. So those $20,000 a year savings per bus, that's almost all gravy. It's not like we're trying to repay a premium on the bus procurement. We expected to pay a little bit more, but even that was marginal, to be honest. So it's as a pure business case, it's been a very, very solid decision for us.
Well, I'm glad that you painted that economic business case solution that you made, and really gave very solid advice to anyone who is interested in CNG. Do not go the retrofit pathway. Do go with the right make and model for your purpose. I think that's a very solid advice. Russell, I do want to ask another question, because you mentioned about the economic side of things, how the CNG transition was an economic business case. But as we all are considering like an environmentally friendly solution, emission. How open is Calgary Transit to consider CNG, RNG blending and potentially going that way to actually solve it from an environmental perspective to ensure your fleet is more or less zero emission? I'm not talking about like a short-term thing, but over the next 10 years, maybe.
I would buy it tomorrow if it's it's that simple. I mean, I think the business case right now, the financial business case, is so big that I can take a hit on that and pay a premium for RNG and get the general goodwill, good feeling from the environmental aspect. I would do it tomorrow if it was available. If just somebody could give it to me.
I'm sure we can establish the supply chain and resolve the constraints with utility partners such as Enbridge on the line. So I'm sure the future is brighter on that side. Thank you, Russell. So Bruce, I do want to end with one question, then we would do a rapid fire with the entire team here. I would be at a loss if I do not touch upon trucking here, because trucking contributes so much to the overall GHG emissions in this country. What is the future that you see for medium to heavy duty trucking for natural gas? And I'm particularly interested in the RNG landscape. So do you see like a bright future there for us there as well?
I do see a lot of opportunities in the medium and heavy duty trucking sector. It is active and vibrant. Organizations like Enbridge have invested in significant facilities. They're out working with fleets, and eventually the RNG case will make its way into trucking. There was a truck fleet that operated one RNG Class 8 truck for a while, about a year ago. So it's been done as a stunt, as it were. It can be done at scale. And in answer to Russell's question, there are some awfully large feedlots not far away from Calgary. They're not in Calgary, but they're close to Calgary. And I've heard talk amongst some of our members that, boy, we got to get that turned into RNG. So I'm quite confident that the Alberta government and some of the municipal governments in Alberta will bring a lot of RNG projects online in the not too distant future. And I think the same goes for the rest of the country. And, the sooner we do that, the more we can do in Class 8 and other aspects of trucking. So it's really exciting. And I mentioned in my slide, there's going to be a lot of other technologies that'll, of course, find their way in. And that electric hybrid project in Southern Ontario is also really exciting. So it's fun to be in this space right now because there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm sure we'll be doing more work with CUTRIC and CUTRIC members over the next few years.
For sure. Thank you so much, Bruce. So I believe we just have a minute left in the panel, and I do want to end with a 20-second snippet answer from all of you here. So I think we have made our say, in terms of selling the vision about CNG, RNG to any enthusiast out there. But for the skeptics who are still apprehensive about going the CNG pathway or the RNG pathway among our audience, what is that one piece of advice that you would give, that you would want the audience to leave this session with? Maybe I would go with you, Joy, first, and then do a 20-second roundtable. Joy?
Give me a call. No, seriously, I can show how a municipality will not have to put any incremental cost into a solution and get to a zero emission fleet. It's being done, and it can be done here across Canada. So give me a call or shoot me an email.
Sure. Thank you. We are going to share your email and your phone number with everyone. Thank you, Joy. Russell, what would be that one piece of advice that you want the skeptics to listen to?
Give me a call.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. No, but seriously, you can see what you can do with it. We have a great facility here, and when travel becomes available to most people, please feel free to come see us, and we can show you that this isn't some kind of weird science project kind of thing, which is unfortunately what some other technologies get labeled with. This is a very viable and a very operational model that works and works economically as well. So come see it in operation if you want to see it, how it can be done. I'm sure we're not perfect, and I'm sure there are a lot of other things we could have done a little better, but this does work.
Great. Well, it is the second phone number to be shared as yours as well. Thank you. Bruce, should I share your phone number as well?
Sure. I was going to say take a ride. You can ride a CNG bus in Calgary, in Hamilton. You can do it in most municipalities in British Columbia, including Vancouver. Take a ride on one of the LNG ferries or the Tadoussac ferries in Quebec or the LNG ferry in Quebec. And then the other thing is on garbage day, just linger a little longer and wave to the CNG garbage truck as it takes the garbage, particularly if you're in Toronto or in the other areas where they're served, and take a look. Maybe not too long from now, the groceries being delivered to your grocery store will also come in a CNG truck or RNG truck, hopefully. So take a ride is my advice, and you'll see how well it works.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And dear audience, thank you so much for tuning into this particular session. I'm sure you are all convinced that the future of electrification, when you look at zero emissions, is not complete without a due consideration to renewable natural gas as a viable option. And our knowledgeable panelists have shared how important it is for us to diversify and to consider it as a complementary solutions. With this, I would like to thank Joey, Russell, and Bruce for sharing your insights once again. Thank you so much for joining this panel. Thank you to dear audience for tuning in. This is Parvati Pillai signing out. Thank you.
Thanks, Parvati.
Thanks, Sarah.